I went to the pursuit of truth. Oh, I'm making so many of them now, isn't it, huh? After a month of plus not making any. And I said I was going to stop at 700, didn't I? Can't help myself, obviously. So these two things that I came across that interested me. The first one is the continuing situation in Gaza, which I think it was yesterday or the day before, President Biden of the United States of America talked about in one of his speeches how he wants to build a port to bring aid to Gaza. I don't know what America's very interested in this, isn't it? Whereas the UK's response was maybe because it's a bit poorer. This is Israel's responsibility to do this. And I must admit, based on what I understand of the logistics when it comes to having a war, if you're the controlling party, i.e. if there's a majority of you in that place, then you then have the responsibility of looking after the civilians, the population within. And therefore, because you keep hearing Israel saying, international aid agencies, NGOs and companies and countries can send more aid, and whereas it should be them doing it. If they want to do this war, then they should be supplying the food and the water and all the things to keep these people alive. And it makes you wonder or worry why this isn't the case, because this is like it's almost a manufactured, and I don't mean this in a, well, maybe manufactured isn't the right word, but in a, if you think of like it's turning into a, they keep talking now about the word famine is coming to Gaza. Babies are starving. I'm sure people are starving as well. They showed them eating beans. Can you imagine yourself, if you're from the West, eating beans, your one meal, a bowl of beans, and the water was filthy that they have to boil? Imagine that. That's what you're having, filthy water and beans for days on end until some aid comes across. The aid that America's dropping in is 1%. The aid that's coming in, I don't believe it's still enough, based on what I've heard. And the fact that America are going to a large, of making a port. But how long is that going to take? There'll be too many dead before that's done, unless it's a quick operation, but it's not my understanding that it would be. Now, the EU and UK are getting involved in doing similar kind of operations. That's what I'm going to play you. And it just seems like, well, this is a little bit late now, isn't it? People are already starving. We knew this was what's going to happen when we knew that, and this isn't, I know you have to be very careful. I'm not attacking, I am attacking the stance of the government of Israel. That's not to say that I'm anti-Semitic. I'm not being anti-Semitic. I know people are often worried about that. I'm not anti-Semitic. Like I've said in previous pursuits of truth, this isn't actually really about the tags that we put on ourselves. That's not what interests me. What interests me is that it's human beings doing this against human beings. It doesn't matter what tags you put on. At the end of the day, you strip that away. This is one set of human beings doing something to another set of human beings. And we should have got past that by now, as we're so enlightened. We know so much, and yet we're still so far from what we all were born with intrinsically of equality and this freedom of everything. But yeah. So what I'm trying to say is Netanyahu's government, this isn't the whole of Israel, because I'm sure there's lots of Israeli people that are not very happy with the conduct of Netanyahu. Well, I know they aren't, because even the relatives of the hostages are not very happy with how slow it's been, and that it's been more about war rather than getting back their people. So I just want to make that distinction quite clear. I'm not talking about Israel as the people. I'm talking about the government. And this is the same. This isn't anything unique about Israeli government. This is governments per se. They're always like this. They always look out, for themselves. And this is what this is interesting about, that it shows that how, if you ask Netanyahu, you ask parts of the government or the army, they'll probably say, this is perfectly fine, we're doing everything possible. And people maybe in Israel are watching and thinking, yes, they are. Look, they're saying they're doing everything possible, and this is just unfortunate, and blah blah blah, whatever, and believing the lie, like we all believed Tony Blair and George W. Bush when they told us about the weapons of mass destruction and etc. So this isn't a targeted thing. This is governments per se. This is human beings per se. Human beings who are in power have this, unfortunately. So yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's just very sad that this is still going on, and that we still see each other in this way, and nothing's changing. People are starving, and this aid is probably, even if they are going to ship it in, is going to take time, and it's probably not going to be enough. And if they want to do it before Ramadan, which starts on Sunday, that's only 2 days away. And the Rafah thing, is it going to start the invasion into Rafah to get rid of Hamas that Israel wants to do? Is that going ahead or not? Because they wanted to do it before Ramadan. Surely they're not going to do it during Ramadan. That's going to be very conflictual. That's a real word. I don't know. It's just it gets messier and messier. But at the end of this, the innocent people, who are, and this isn't to try and sort of pick on one side and saying that, this is just the fact of the matter, is that the people in Gaza who are innocent, if you could be God and you could see which ones are innocent, we know there are a lot of innocent people in Gaza that, want peace, if they can still have it within the climate that they've been in. There are innocent that are not taking up arms, that are not fighting, that just want to live, that just want to eat, that just want to be. At the moment, they settle for that. And yet, look what's happening. And it's not just Israel, because you could just look at the rest of the world and how it's reacting. No one's, stopping it. The nearest they're doing is they're trying to help out by sending aid as a kind of guilt thing. And then there's some words that they say, and that's it. I don't know. Shameful, really, of the human race.
That interim report conference. Now, the EU and 5 nations, including the UK, will be involved in an American operation to get more aid into the Gaza Strip via the sea. In a joint statement, the European Commission, Cyprus, the UAE, the UK, the United States said the humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire, with innocent Palestinian families and children desperate for basic necessities. That is why today the group is announcing our intent to open a maritime corridor to deliver much-needed additional amounts of humanitarian assistance by sea. The group could go on to say the delivery of the aid by sea will be complex, and they will continue to work with Israel to expand deliveries by land. Well, that maritime corridor is expected to open this weekend and to be tested by a maiden voyage from Cyprus today. Speaking in Cyprus, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, described the aid situation in Gaza as a humanitarian catastrophe.
The key challenge is to get the aid to the people on the ground in Gaza. And we know the difficulties faced at the land borders in Gaza, be it through the Rafah border crossing or through the Jordan Road corridor. And that is why today the Republic of Cyprus, the European Commission, the United Arab Emirates and the United States, of course supported by other critical partners, announced our intent to open the maritime corridor to deliver much-needed additional amounts of humanitarian assistance by sea.
We're going to speak to our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes, in just a moment. First, though, let's go to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. A concerted effort, Alistair, by allies there to try and get much-needed humanitarian aid into Gaza. Some might say it's too little, too late. How is the news being received where you are?
Well, officially Israel says that it supports this objective, but we remain to see how closely involved Israel will be. There will no doubt need to be some coordination with the Israeli military who are on the ground through much of Gaza, but whether it's above and beyond that, let's wait and see, because to be honest, there are an awful lot of questions outstanding as to how this is going to work. The news over the last 12 hours or so since President Biden first announced it in the State of the Union address last night has been sort of coming pretty thick and fast, and people are trying to work out exactly how it's going to shape up. Now, firstly, this should be seen as another act of frustration and impatience from the US, the EU, the British and others about the lack of humanitarian aid getting into Gaza. The first sort of sign of that we saw in terms of aid delivery was the airdrops. This is the next step, but it is no substitute for still trying to find more land routes in. The EU is sort of piloting this initiative on one hand, and then we've got the American military initiative on the other hand. The Americans say they're not going to put any boots on the ground, but that brings with its own questions. What sort of pontoon are they going to build? They need to get into deeper water because the waters around the Gaza shore are not necessarily deep enough to bring heavy naval vessels into. There would, one assume, have to be a degree of force protection there for a multiple of reasons. Firstly, to make sure that the aid can get off the ships safely and securely when you've got a very desperate population there, but then in order that it can be distributed effectively. But also, if you've got the American military going close to Gaza, well, you still have some pretty sizable remnants of Hamas operating in Gaza, and they will see the Americans as an enemy. So all of these kind of, they're more than technicalities, but all of these kind of areas of logistics need to be worked through, which I think is what the Americans are going to do. To what extent the British are going to be involved, I don't know whether Deborah knows more, but it seems to me to be a little unclear at this stage. And then there's the time. The ship that von der Leyen was speaking about is due to arrive before Ramadan, which starts on Sunday night. I think that's a symbol that they want to get some aid there before Ramadan starts. But the American initiative to sort of build a pontoon, that's going to take some time.
Alistair, thank you for that update there from Jerusalem. Plenty of questions around that. Let's bring in our security and defence editor, Deborah Haynes. Deborah, afternoon to you. As we were hearing there, logistically it's complex. It's also complex in terms of military strategy, isn't it, in terms of countries' desire or not to have boots on the ground there. What has the British government said about British military involvement in this?
Well, the British do seem to be a bit sort of caught off guard by the EU, the presence of Ursula von der Leyen in Cyprus today. Of course, the announcement in Joe Biden's State of the Union address last night, which first spoke about this maritime pier that they're going to be building off the Gaza coast to try and get this humanitarian sea corridor open. However, behind the scenes for a long time now, the British have been closely involved in discussions with the US and other allies about the creation of exactly this kind of capability. You have to remember that after the October the 7th Hamas attacks on Israel and then the unfolding war in Gaza, the UK moved a fairly sizable chunk of forces to Cyprus, where the RAF has an air base. That's where they've been conducting these airstrikes against Houthi militants in Yemen from. It's basically like in the absence of a functioning aircraft carrier in the region that the UK could operate from, Cyprus is doing that role. And so there is a fairly sizable military presence there that has been discussing exactly the feasibility of this kind of maritime corridor. So yes, while the EU have been quick off the mark, and notable that Ursula von der Leyen didn't even mention Britain in her statement, the British are behind the scenes very much leaning in and wanting to be involved. But the exact details about that, I understand it's being discussed right now, what it's going to look like. It's clearly not going to be a quick in-out. It's a long-term operation. Yes, the EU is saying that they hope the first shipments will start by the weekend with this pilot happening today. But in terms of what the British will be doing, I think you can expect to have more details about that coming out in the next few days, but it's going to be a long-term involvement, clearly high risk. Ali pointed out the various dangers of operating in that region, obviously not just Hamas, but also other Iranian-backed forces there. So clearly the UK wanting to be involved, and we'll learn more how that's going to look going forwards.
Deborah, thank you for that update. Well, how is this operation actually going to work? Well, we can bring in our military analyst, Sean Bell. Hello, good afternoon to you, Sean.
Hi, Sam.
I don't know how much experience you have with this particular type of operation.